Hello, college football fans. Welcome to episode 94 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined, as always, by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, college football fans and Husker fans.
Hello, hello, hello. So we are here after a 2-week break to discuss Nebraska's game against Northwestern, as well as the different games from weeks 10 and 11 of the college football season. And for those out there who may be listening to us for the first time, this is College Football Throwdown. We are a father-son podcast that talks about college football by college football fans for college football fans, with an emphasis on our favorite team, the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And one thing that we traditionally do at the beginning of episodes is to crack a cold beverage for us to drink. But we've actually been neglecting that for the recent episodes. But Dad, I believe you're here to rectify that mistake.
I am here to rectify that mistake. Absolutely. You know, I can't believe it's 94. We're approaching our 100th episode, Alex. That's pretty crazy. Although with COVID, who knows? This whole year has just been bizarre, and our schedule has been disrupted significantly because of that. But yes, the beer that I'm going to open today is a little bit of a unique one because it's from Shell Brewery in New Ulm, Minnesota, home of your great grandmother, who is doing well at 112 years old, up there in northern or central Arizona, or central Minnesota rather. And Shell's is actually the second oldest brewery in the United States. They have been brewing beer there since 1860.
Wow.
And this is Oktoberfest. It's a Marzen style fest beer is the way they describe it. It's a very good multiple hops. There's like 3 different types of hops in it. 3 different types of malt in it, which makes it very, very flavorful beer. And I really enjoy it. And so it's called Shell's Oktoberfest, usually produced only during the fall of the year. And then you have to wait another year for it. So there we go. So, did you hear that?
A little bit, yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's all foamy.
Oh no.
I must have, I must have shook it up a little too much.
You got a little too excited before this podcast.
Exactly.
All right.
So we're just going to have to let that one ease out.
All right. Fair enough. So on last week's or the previous podcast, episode 93, we were discussing Nebraska's loss against Ohio State and then the upcoming Wisconsin game. And at that time, we were discussing the things that we had heard about their quarterback potentially testing positive for COVID-19, and assuming that he would be able to play and that everything would go ahead, with Wisconsin at their full strength. And we predicted that Nebraska would lose in that situation. But as it turned out, he did have COVID-19, as did several other players on their team, so much so that the game ended up being canceled. And then there was an attempt by Nebraska to get a non-conference opponent to come play in Lincoln as kind of a last-minute replacement. But the Big Ten did not let us move forward with that. So we ended up not playing a game that week and just moved on to prepping for Northwestern.
Right. And, obviously there was some consternation in Lincoln and then, of course, pushback and, accusations of us being whiners and all that sort of stuff, which some of it is probably accurate. I have to say that, at some point you have to just concede that it's happening the way it is and move on. Again, I think our administration and the staff there, the coaches, have handled it very well in all of these regards. But there are times when our fans don't handle it so well.
Yeah.
So that's our biggest problem.
Yeah. The Nebraska fans, they're a passionate bunch, which is a good thing in many cases, but can also kind of backfire. It is a little frustrating, but I understand. I'm sure for the Big Ten, it's a legal thing because they set all this up within the Big Ten bubble, right? In terms of the COVID precautions and all that. And even though I know it was a point that whatever team we brought in had to have as good of COVID precautions, or more so than what the Big Ten had, which this team did, but still it wasn't allowed, which I get for legal reasons, probably why the Big Ten didn't want that to happen.
Right. I mean, the reality was, they had entered into this plan, entered into agreements with their distribution partners, their television, their advertisers, all of those people, right? So let's fast forward. Doesn't matter how good the protocols were from the visiting team. Let's fast forward and assume the worst case scenario for the Big Ten, which is Nebraska plays University of Tennessee Chattanooga, and then following that game, Nebraska has an outbreak that whether they actually can assign it to the game at UT or the game with Chattanooga is irrelevant. At that point, the suspicion or the possibility exists there. And now you've jeopardized future Big Ten contractual games, like, say, the Northwestern game that we're going to be discussing in today's podcast, might not have happened, right? So now you've just shot yourself in the foot with additional games lost because Nebraska went outside the bubble and played a team, brought a team in and did that. Or, so there's all kinds of implications that just weren't worth it.
Yep. So, I understand that. So we moved on and we're prepping for the game against Northwestern in week 11 of the overall college football schedule. And we ended up playing that game, and it was at Northwestern. And Northwestern ended up winning that game 21-13 in what I'm sure was a frustrating watch for many Nebraska fans out there, because in terms of the stats and just the overall level of play and who got in the red zone more often and all that sort of stuff, Nebraska was definitely the better team that day. But we made more mistakes. And what's particularly frustrating to me is that Northwestern is typically known as a team that doesn't make mistakes. They're not the most talented, but they do what they do well, and they don't mess up. They don't shoot themselves in the foot. Not quite true in this game, though. I believe they ended up having like 8 penalties, and they turned the ball over twice. So they made their fair share of mistakes as well. And we just weren't able to capitalize off of those the way we should have.
Well, not only not capitalize off of those, but it's also the timing of when the turnovers occurred for them versus us. Those kinds of circumstances certainly played into it a little bit. But one of our turnovers that we got from them was an interception that was brought down to like the 3 or 4 yard line and led to a touchdown on the next play. So we got 7 points out of those 2 turnovers, on our side of the ledger. So, but yes, the key here is that they just played disciplined football, especially after halftime. At halftime they hadn't played that well, and frankly, it looked pretty good for Nebraska. But then, as has typically been our issue, not just during the Scott Frost era, but going back quite a ways in the last 15, 20 years, Nebraska has been a team that did not adjust well at halftime. And I would have to go back any number of coaching staffs to be able to say with confidence that Nebraska was a team that I could expect was going to adjust well at halftime. It almost had to go back to Frank Solich and Tom Osborne's old staff to really be able to say that. Since then, we haven't done that well, and we certainly didn't this week.
Yes, that is true. And I had forgotten that particular note about the game, but you're correct. We got that interception that basically led to a very easy touchdown for us after that, which was the only touchdown we scored, which means that we basically the offense didn't like actually have a drive that scored a touchdown. We did get field goals, and then we would get very close, only to then, right, like you said, both of our turnovers were where we were having a good drive.
Right.
And basically, like in the end zone, we turned
right.
the ball over.
Right. One was an interception in the end zone. Another one was a circumstance where we were basically, like second and goal inside the 5 yard line, and we threw a pass that bounced off one of our own players' helmets and then got intercepted and returned a little bit by Northwestern. But yes, getting back to the fundamental of it, you could see the skills of the individual players. You can see all these glimmers of hope within Nebraska, but at the end of the day, the fact that we doubled them up practically on first downs, we had 140 more yards than they did, more time of possession, all those kinds of things. It's irrelevant if you can't do the simple stuff like penalties on procedure that puts you behind the sticks and makes it harder for you to get a first down, or puts you in the bad field position, which they were able to do in the second half, and they were able to keep us hold back. When we did drive the ball, we had to drive it a long way.
Right. Well, and that was one other little note I was going to make, was that on the special teams angle, we made 2 field goals, and then we missed one, and their guy missed one and didn't have any others. So that kind of equaled out a little bit there. And then on the kicking side of things, you'll remember there was that one punt that caught the wind real nice, and Wandale Robinson had to go way back to get it. So we started that drive like on the 10-yard line, whereas like I think there were 2 specific punts I can remember by us where they got a solid return off of it, and so got to start with good field position.
Yep.
In one of those cases, which I think it was in the fourth quarter, I distinctly remember, I don't know what happened, because there were like 2 red jerseys like coming for the guy, and he just like ran right between them, and I just didn't understand how those 2 didn't get that guy.
Yeah, well, and it's one of those things where they were both angling to have that guy move, run to the right or run to the left, and not run into each other, right? But he was able to split them basically, because neither one of them committed to head on attack on the guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just poor tackling technique. Again, that's coaching. That's coaching on our special teams units, which was really poor. I mean, it's clear we have an improvement at our field goal kicker position, but our punter was not good at all yesterday. And our punt and kickoff coverage teams were atrocious.
Actually, I have here, at least comparing the 2 teams, we had 5 punts with an average of 40 yards, and they had 6 with an average of 43.
Right.
So,
but we had the benefit of a wind aided punt or 2 that went quite large, but we also had some 25 or 30-yard type punts. So his ability to get consistency was tough, and I get it. It's because there was wind, but still, as a punter, you've got to know if you're punting into the wind, then you keep it low trajectory, and that was also part of the reason for the kickoffs and punt returns having success for them is height. It's not enough to just kick it with some distance like the 40 yards. It's got to be 40 yards and high. Right. And we didn't get that. So our punter did not grade out, in my mind, high in this game.
Yeah. But yeah, to just go over some stats real quick, like you mentioned, we had 28 first downs to their 14, 442 yards of total offense to their 317. We controlled time of possession by 32-27 to their 27-33. All those sorts of stuff. But then there are a couple of stats that really show the difference in the game, I think, where if you combine 3rd down and 4th down conversions, we were 6 of 17, whereas they were 8 of 16. So neither team doing great on that regard, but we were definitely worse. And red zone scores, we were 3 of 6, they were 2 of 3.
Right. Yep. And we had a couple of other, like you said, drives that were moving well, that were threatening to be a score type of situation, like the interception that Adrian Martinez threw, which was not in the red zone, but we had a great drive going, and then we, throw that pick in the end zone on that play, where he threw that up for his receiver, who he was throwing to a tight end who's like 6'8". So I get his logic, why he was thinking that might not be a bad idea. because but then our receiver, that tight end, was not in the proper position and ended up jumping backwards away from the ball instead of jumping towards the ball, which he needed to do. He needed to jump to catch the ball at the high point, and he did the exact opposite. So, that particular interception, although it was clearly, Martinez just throwing the ball up for grabs. Sometimes quarterbacks do that, especially if they believe their receiver has an advantage, which in this case he did. He had probably 5 inches on the other guys around him, and so you had arm wingspan in there, and he had a foot more, right? So if he is positioned a little bit better and he jumps properly, he probably gets up there and gets that ball.
Right. But I wonder if for that receiver, because that was later in the game, and that was a drive where we had started pretty far back, I remember, and
yes,
Martinez had some nice scrambles, in third down situations to get us first downs, and was doing some great stuff with his legs, and was like, okay, we're getting some positive movement going, like you're saying. But he had been all over the place the whole day with his throws in terms of underthrowing receivers or overthrowing them, throwing it too fast. I mean, the timings was just totally off. So I wonder if that receiver kind of thought, oh, maybe he's been throwing it long today. I should jump, edge on the side of it being long, and then it was the opposite. There, it was underthrown.
Right. Yep.
So.
Well, and he was in that particular play. Our tight end was open earlier. He actually threw the ball late. He needed to throw that ball earlier, and then it would have been a much more uncontested situation, and he probably would have either scored or caught the ball just before the goal line, and either fallen in or been really close.
Right.
But yeah. A general criticism of Martinez for this game is that he seemed out of sorts from the very early stages. I mean, literally the first few drives of the game. He was very inaccurate. He seemed antsy back in the pocket. He was not comfortable. He was not relaxed. He wasn't letting the game come to him. He was super antsy, and he was just throwing shit. I mean, just wasn't even close to accurate. Plays that should have been a success, and he was not doing it. And then in this case of the interception that we've been discussing, even that ball, he had some other options. There was another receiver that was reasonably open that would have been about a 15 or 20-yard gain, and he could have picked that person in his progression rather than the deep ball. And we hadn't thrown the ball deep that much. So why throw a Hail Mary, kind of throw it up for grabs, when that's the first time you've thrown it deep all day? Go ahead and do the intermediate route of 20 yards. Hell, we hadn't done that very well either.
Right. Well, yeah, because that's the thing. So, like, Martinez has never been great at the deep ball, and we understand that. But, we have traditionally, he's playing solidly, been able to rely on him for that medium or short length ball.
Right.
But you're right. He was way off base today. And, I'm not 100% sure why. Because once again, like, it seemed to be so much fits and starts with him, because there were some drives where he's showing off why he's a good dual threat quarterback, why he's tough for defenses, scrambling on third downs, or just tucking it for quarterback draws. We went back to that several times for good results. There were stuff like that. But yeah, then whenever we got off pace, it was just like we saw in that Ohio State game. Whenever we got off pace of the yards we wanted to be getting on first down.
Off schedule.
Yeah. And we always just kind of slowed down and weren't able to continue after that. And those offsides penalties, like you mentioned, or false starts, were killing us there, getting us off that pace.
Right. Well, that's exactly right. And again, that's leadership. That's him being consistent between practice and the game, in terms of how he claps to get the snaps of the ball, in terms of how he communicates and lines up people and gets them organized where they need to be. so that we can run our offense at the speed that we wanted. It was clear early on that we wanted to play with pace, with more pace than we were trying to at Ohio State. So we were trying to increase the tempo, and it seemed to cause him to play with high anxiety as opposed to him playing within himself. And that led to bad things for not only him, but for the linemen and the backs and everyone, in
Right.
terms of knowing where they were supposed to be. It was like all of our team was just a little on edge. Like they weren't as confident and as they didn't know what they were doing as well as they should have. And
Right.
and that goes back to the coaches.
Right.
That
Well,
is squarely on Scott.
I'll give two counterpoints to that. One, I know that Juergens, our center, got hurt, and so there was some shuffling around at the offensive line to account for that. And there were a couple of bad snaps, kind of as a result of that, but it wasn't a major issue. So I understand that part of it. And we had some players, like I thought Dedrick Mills played great on that day. He had some nice runs, with authority, where he's running with authority and things like that. So those were some positive signs I saw. So that, there were players I saw on the offense who were, performing well, but in some cases, like our receiver was open and then Adrian just completely misses up the pass. And it's like, well, that's on you, Adrian. And then I will say, I remember later in the game, I think this was when McCaffrey was in, but there was one particular dropped pass, like in the end zone, that I screamed at the TV at, because it was a really bad drop. But, unfortunately, and I feel bad because I like Martinez, and obviously he's been this is his third year as our quarterback now, but I'm sort of starting to drift into the crowd based on what I saw of McCaffrey's playing, who also admittedly threw a bad interception right in the end zone, bouncing off a helmet, a weird kind of situation. And he's also not been great at handoffs to receivers, both in the Ohio State game and this game. He fumbled the ball there, which was not great. But what we did save him throwing, he was definitely more accurate than Martinez. He's also got a good set of legs underneath him. And at the very least, if we're playing him, he's our future, being a true freshman. So, maybe better to develop him and give him the snaps, and make this a learning year for him rather than our junior who is still a head case somehow after 3 years.
Right. Well, he's a redshirt freshman, but now this season isn't going to count. So next year he'll still be a freshman. So will our other recruit who's a true freshman, and then we have Martinez who will continue to be a junior. So, but yes, Martinez, this is his third year as our starter. By now, we should expect certain things from him that we're not seeing. And I don't think that comes as a surprise or that he feels he's being unfairly evaluated at this point either. I'm pretty sure that that Adrian understands that, and he knows that he has to be better, right? He knows he's supposed to be better, but he's just not. And he's just not making these decisions fast enough. We keep talking about being a fast blinker, somebody who can process information and move through some things very quickly, right? And he's not that guy. So I would agree with you. I think now that we've played, I was not in favor of Martinez, McCaffrey getting a start in either of these first two games. It was very much, in my opinion, the right thing to do to stay with Adrian. I would not disagree with making a switch now because we've given Adrian an opportunity. He underperformed, in my opinion, in the second half of the Ohio State game quite significantly, and then I think he played particularly poorly early in the game against Northwestern, and then in the third quarter, again just kind of started spiraling into worse and worse decisions, and only after the other team gets a lead and we're kind of out of it. And now we're in total scramble mode where all the pressure's off. The likelihood is we're going to lose. And then he kind of relaxes again and can start playing better again. It's a weird phenomenon. And it has to do with somebody who just fundamentally is having trouble dealing with the pressure. And I think McCaffrey has shown himself to be such a brilliant student of the game. He seems to always be confident in what he's doing. Even if he does it wrong, he's still confident, right? He's not shaken in his confidence. And I think that's a very important characteristic in a quarterback.
Well,
and we may discuss that later in some of the other games when we talk nationally, because that's huge. You've got to have a quarterback who's good and confident.
I've got 2 more points to make, and then we'll move off of this game. But with the point with Adrian, what do you have another example from your history of college football that you can think of where a quarterback showed flashes of brilliance and actually played quite well in their first year and then degraded over time? Usually you'd think it's the opposite, right? You struggle as a freshman, but you gain more experience, and by the time you're junior or senior, you're playing your best football. But for Adrian, it seems to be the opposite, and I'm not exactly sure why.
Right. Well, regretfully, there's one that's from fairly recent Nebraska vintage that we can speak to, which is Taylor Martinez, who during his freshman season was spectacular and was being discussed as a possible Heisman Trophy candidate. And then he hurt his foot and got that major turf toe injury and was never the same again, and seemed to never get over it. And it ended up affecting his throwing motion and everything. And he was never the same quarterback again.
Right.
But so I can blame that a little bit on the injury.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That is true of Taylor Martinez, but that injury was a big deal. And, his speed as a runner was like his ace in the hole, and he was never quite as fast again after that. But I know Adrian also has gotten hurt, but it seems to be more mental with him than physical.
I totally agree with you. And yes, there are a lot of quarterbacks. There was a quarterback from Wisconsin, like the year after they won the Big Ten championship. He was returning starter, and he literally kind of got what they call the yips, where all of a sudden he just couldn't make decisions. He couldn't make throws, and they just didn't know why. And they got the sports psychologist involved and all kinds of stuff. And they never really were able to get him to turn around until the following year. After that season, he just had a terrible year, but then he came back again because he was still an underclassman, came back again for his senior year and ended up having a pretty good senior year. So usually somebody gets through that, can work their way mentally through that. But Adrian seems to have not progressed in that regard as I had hoped he would, and as most athletes do. And again, it's generally about confidence, just about repetitions. And this is an example of where, there's just been a lot of things that have all kind of merged to affect Scott and his program more than it would affect others. And it's why we find ourselves having made a lot of steps in the positive direction. Our talent level is way higher now than it's been. I don't think there's any question in my mind about that. I'm very confident in making that statement. But we're still making first-year coaching kind of mistakes. Our coaches are not in sync. Our players aren't in sync with what the coaches want. By the third year, most of these players should have had enough repetition and understand what Scott's trying to do and understand the language that's being used and everything, to where this stuff is second nature to them, right? They could do it in their sleep. But for whatever reason, it seems like our players are still out there, both offense and defense, thinking too much. They're out there thinking instead of just doing. And as a third-year program, it shouldn't be that way. So that's the real crux of this, and that's what Scott needs to, again. And it's sad that he's having to do this again, because he's talked about having to do this in the past, and that is he needs to simplify. He needs to lock in on a smaller number of plays and get the damn execution down on those plays, and then build off of that going forward. I think he's got too much offense introduced, and you got too many guys that don't know which side of the quarterback they're supposed to be on. You got wide receivers running back and forth from one side to the other. You got offensive linemen who obviously don't know their assignment well enough that a late shift on the defensive line, which was one of the adjustments that Northwestern made at halftime. They started shifting just before the snap of the ball because they can anticipate the snap of the ball because of our stupid hand clapping with the quarterback. Okay. And so, you got to change that up. You got to have ways to keep teams from being able to do that. Right. So, those are the kinds of deals that third year program should have in place. And we're still acting like this is the first year. And I get it. Lots of reasons, we had the weird game his first year where we lost our first game because of a lightning strike and was canceled. And that kind of put us behind the 8 ball in his first season. And then, some bizarre things, injuries and stuff happened. And, last year we had some very oddball, injuries and stuff that happened early in the year that put us behind the 8 ball. And now this year we didn't have spring practice. I mean, there's all these things and it hurts. It hurts a lot. But then you see other programs, they've seemed to overcome it. Why can't we?
Right.
And that's back to the coaches.
Well, and to that point, you just made me think, Frost came into UCF, a program that was way, way down in the dumps, and in 2 years managed to get them, to their undefeated season. So, it does seem odd that he had an amazing quarterback to be able to execute a system, which was a big help for him. But still, he was able to get that offense, those players up to speed on like his system in 2 years' time. So why is it the year 3 at Nebraska and we're still, seemingly so far behind of that?
Right. Well, and I you hit on it. I think if there's a bunch of reasons, but the biggest one, he had a quarterback. He had a kid who emerged as the clear leader, who had confidence and who knew what Scott wanted to do, and he knew it intimately, and he was able to make good decisions and make plays. Okay. And so the guy had supreme confidence. I would not describe Adrian Martinez as a guy who has supreme confidence and understands the offense inside and out. He's not ever demonstrated that. And he's in his 3rd year. That's unacceptable to me.
Okay. And then the last point I was going to make, one more positive, since we've been pretty negative about this game and there's a lot to be negative about. On the defensive side, the defense gave up a touchdown on Northwestern's first play of the first half and their first play of the second half. And then, between that, they did a very good job of, slowing them down. I noticed that early on, we weren't getting any pressure on their quarterback, but we kind of changed some things up. And then we really were. We got a sack or two and forced them to throw early and things like that. They missed their field goal. And then they did get one more touchdown in the fourth quarter. But given how bad the offense is playing and kind of forcing the defense into, helping us out, also getting the 2 interceptions, one of which led directly to a touchdown, there were some missed tackles that made me very upset while watching the game. But overall, I have to say that the defense did pretty good. And if our offense had just been able to execute, like we've been saying, we would have won this game, maybe comfortably.
Yes. And I completely agree with everything you just said there. Yep. Yeah. I think that's a good summation.
All right. So moving on to the national side of things. Back in the last podcast, we gave predictions about 2 of the games, the big games for that week. One was Ohio State versus Penn State. I predicted that Ohio State would win 38-28. You predicted 35-17. And the final score ended up being 38-25. So I was pretty darn close on my my recommendation there.
Yes, you were. And especially given that it wasn't that way early, right? I mean, Ohio State really was in dominant control, and then they kind of let Penn State sneak back into it a little bit.
Right. And then the other big game, a big game in the Big 12, was Oklahoma State, Texas. I predicted that Oklahoma State would win 45-31. You predicted that they would win 35-28. And ended up being a Texas victory of 41-34. Wasn't that in overtime?
I think it was, yes.
Yeah. And as I recall, I didn't watch the game, but I saw the highlights. Oklahoma State should have won that game. Like they all the stats, they were way better, like kind of like we were against Northwestern. But I think they had some untimely interceptions or turnovers that let kind of Texas get back in it. And then and they have Sam Ellington, that quarterback, who I know you mentioned as just a guy that never gives up, and I think that proved itself to be the case there again.
Yep, I would agree, and it's just it's frustrating to me because I'm not a huge Texas fan, but I have great admiration for that quarterback. He could play for me any day.
We'll take him. And then the other one, which was big for us, of course, coming from Michigan, MSU versus Michigan, with MSU pulling it out 27-24.
Yes, and they looked really good, particularly their quarterback and one of their wide receivers, a young player, I think his last name was Smith, that just kind of came out of nowhere and just made some absolute highlight type catches that led to a few scores for MSU that allowed them to kind of stay in it and stretch the lead a little bit and really put the pressure on Michigan. And then Michigan kind of made some bad errors that allowed Michigan State to secure the win.
Right. And last game to mention, Kansas State, who was a contender in the Big 12, got crushed by West Virginia 37-10, which I hadn't really heard much about that game, but I know that is a big deal in the Big 10.
Oh, Big 12, yeah.
Oh, Big 12,
that's right. Yes. Well, and the frustrating thing to me is that now as this is playing out, it's pretty apparent that Texas and Oklahoma are going to, again, by the end of the season, most likely emerge as the likely champions of that league again, which, it's been Oklahoma for I don't know, either 7 years in a row or 6 out of the last 7. So it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it seems like Oklahoma State is almost kind of cursed in a way. Like they're always a contender, but they always seem to lose one or two somewhere along the way.
Right. Exactly. Yep. And that's the thing. It's like they have a curse like we are now fighting a curse. And it's about having a culture that knows how to win, that expects to win.
Well,
and we now have a culture of not winning. And so we don't expect to win. Now ours is any game. Oklahoma State's is kind of limited to whenever they go up against the big boys, meaning Oklahoma or Texas, they tend to fail.
Yeah,
they just do, even if they have better talent.
Right. I think what they're struggling with is more comparable to what we were in the Bo Pelini era, where we're consistently winning 9 games, but we could never win the big ones, the ones that really matter. And that's kind of where they're at. Whereas where we're at now is we're struggling to get winning seasons, period. So, yeah, it's a bit of a different curse that we're dealing with.
Right. Right. Well, but I really do believe, I mean, again, as we talked about in our coverage of the Nebraska Northwestern game, bottom line, if you clean up the mistakes of penalties, okay, and you don't make stupid interceptions, okay, you got to figure you're going to get 1 turnover a game. That's just the nature of the sport, the weird bounce off the helmet deal. Okay, I get that. But you can't just throw balls up for grabs either, right? You're going to lose a lot of football games because of that. And so you've got to be able to make the right decisions, and you've got to be smart and disciplined about your turnovers and your penalties and your tackling. It's just basic fundamental stuff. And so it's all about fundamentals for Nebraska. They clean up the fundamentals, and all of a sudden our team looks a lot better.
Yep. And I absolutely agree with that. But the tough part is that's been our issue for 5 years now, and or longer than that maybe. And some of our coaches, whoever we bring in, they just can't seem to get that basic part right.
That's right.
looking at now week 11, this past weekend of football, there were a lot of great games. I caught some of them via just watching the highlights afterwards. But a surprise was Indiana playing against Michigan and winning 38-21. So it's been a rough 2 weeks if you're a Michigan fan. From the highlights, I saw Michigan did have some of the receivers made some terrific catches, but Indiana just played a great game from what it looks like. They've had some major improvements, it seems.
Totally, absolutely. They won that game. It wasn't that Michigan lost it. It wasn't necessarily a circumstance where Michigan had 7 turnovers and just blew out the game because of that. No, Indiana played hard and earned that victory.
Yeah. So that was a good game. And then there was Florida versus Georgia, number 5 Georgia versus number 8 Florida, based on the AP poll, and it kind of surprisingly was a bit of a blowout. Florida won 44-28, and it was 31-21, or some, I'm sorry, 38-21 by the end of the first half. So basically a first half with no defense on either side.
Right.
And Georgia just wasn't able to make up that deficit in the second half.
Right. Yep. Definitely Georgia is missing some elements this year that they're struggling to when they get up against the best that of their SEC brethren, they're getting beat. So they're just a notch below where they maybe were last year or where people expected them to be.
Mm-hmm. And then another great one that went into double overtime, which was number 1 Clemson versus number 4 Notre Dame, which ended up being a Notre Dame upset of 47-40 in double overtime, with the caveat that Clemson's star quarterback Trevor Lawrence was out of the game, correct, due to COVID positive test.
As well as a number of other players that were out either due to COVID or injuries. So their defense was quite depleted as well. I mean, Clemson is a shell of what that team looked like on paper going into the season. So it'll be I'm going to be curious to see what happens when all of their pieces that can come back are able to come back. And there's a great likelihood that if Notre Dame does what it's supposed to do and Clemson is able to reset the ship here before too long, they're going to end up matching up again in the ACC championship game, because remember, this year only Notre Dame is playing as a full member of the ACC for this season because of COVID. So they are going to be eligible to compete for the ACC championship.
Yeah, that would be interesting if Notre Dame finally finds their way into the playoff as a member of the ACC this time.
Yep.
It is worth noting, though, from what I saw of the highlights, the second team quarterback for Clemson, who's obviously their younger guy who will eventually take over when Trevor is gone, he played well from what I saw. He had some nice throws for sure. So I don't, that was obviously a factor, but that wasn't the main reason they lost.
Correct. Yep. Well, obviously their defense struggled at times to defend Notre Dame, especially Notre Dame's tight end, who had a phenomenal day. But yes, well, and yeah, no tears lost for Clemson. Don't get me wrong. That quarterback is a 5-star who was the number 1 quarterback in the country last year or 2 years ago or whenever it was that he came out of high school. So I mean, yeah, he's a very talented guy that we're going to hear a lot about, and everybody's going to have to learn how to pronounce that unpronounceable last name of his.
Yeah, it did sound like a tongue twister.
Yeah.
And then
I'm going to call him ukulele.
Right. That's an interesting abbreviation. And then of interest to us Nebraska fans, our upcoming opponent for this week, Penn State, played against Maryland and lost 19-35. However, once again, from watching the highlights, that score belies how lopsided the victory was. It was pretty much over. It was 35-7, I think, by the very start of the third quarter, because Penn State threw an interception that got returned for a touchdown. So I mean, at that point, you're already up 28 points at the start of the second half. Obviously, you can't come back from that, but that's going to be hard for anybody. And over at Maryland, they've got Tua Tuvalunga's, however you pronounce his last names, his brother is the quarterback over there at Maryland, and it seems like he played a great game.
Right. And he did, and Maryland's going to be an interesting team to watch because they got blown out by Northwestern team that we pretty much controlled, but they got blown out by Northwestern like 49-7 or 3 or something, and then they turn around the week later and slow down Minnesota and are able to outscore them towards the end and beat Minnesota. And then turn around and beat Penn State. So now they're 2-1 and looking good with a team that most people had projected as being near the bottom of the Big Ten.
Right. And now transitioning that into the preview for this Nebraska-Penn State game, obviously us Nebraska fans are down in the dumps after, what seemed like a very winnable Northwestern game that we lost. But for Penn State fans, they lost to Indiana in a close one right at the beginning, then got beat by Ohio State, now kind of got crushed a little bit by Maryland. So they're not feeling great either. What's your kind of read on Penn State there? I'm not exactly I haven't followed them closely enough to kind of get the reason why they're struggling.
Well, number one, they've had a number of turnovers and untimely turnovers and mistakes and penalties and stuff because they're young, right? But I would caution Nebraska fans in thinking this is not as talented a Penn State team. They have quite a bit of talent. They don't have a great quarterback at this point. They have a young quarterback who's going to be keep getting better. So I think you're going to see a trajectory of improvement for Penn State and their players as they move along here and progress in the season. But clearly they're a team that if they play like they've been playing, i.e. if they continue to make mistakes and if the quarterback continues to make some poor decisions in terms of throwing the football that allow our defense to pick a ball off here or there, then we have a pretty decent chance because it is at home, but right now Nebraska is going to be embroiled in a very intense week of preparation because Nebraska fans will be unrelenting and Nebraska media will be unrelenting about trying to figure out what Scott's going to do at quarterback. And Scott is not going to share that. And we probably won't know until the game starts who's going to actually start. And regardless of who starts, even if Adrian starts, it'll probably end up being Adrian as the starter, but he'll have a much quicker trigger to pull him. You know what I mean? His hook will be a lot quicker.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling that our opportunity to win early in the season, in my opinion, was going to be the Wisconsin and Northwestern games. I felt going into the season that Wisconsin being at home and Northwestern being a team that we had beaten last year, I did not anticipate Northwestern's improvement on offense that they've now demonstrated here early in the season. But those are the two that I thought, okay, those are two teams that I thought we could be competitive with. I don't think our roster matches up very well with Penn State's. I think that they're way better than us. But Penn State has proven, much like Nebraska has, that you can have a roster that's got more talent, but if you make enough mistakes, you can lose to anybody. And Penn State's 0-3 now because of that. And I think that they probably should be 2-1. And they believe that and are frustrated that they find themselves 0-3.
Yeah. Yep, that is definitely a fair assessment, I would say. And it is weird in that it feels like the season has just started, right? Our guys are just starting to get in the groove, and part of that's because of our Wisconsin game getting canceled. But this Penn State game is the fourth game in an 8-game season. So we're basically already halfway through, which is weird to think about.
It is.
But I think to start with on the Frost situation, because I know that there's a lot of anger amongst Nebraska fans and disappointment, and I feel that too. Due to the fact that we're just seeing these same basic mistakes that we've been seeing since Frost took over. But and you typically think of the third year of the coach is new start as like, okay, by the third year you need to show significant improvement over the first year. But I do think that gets a little caveat next to it for this particular season because of COVID and everything. Like, obviously, Scott wasn't able to develop his talent and train with his guys as much as he would like to due to this weird season that we've had this year. So I understand to a certain extent, like, we were never going to be as polished as we would hope we would be by this third year due to that. So I'm giving Scott some slack in that regard. But I think that I seriously do want to see McCaffrey come out as the starter in this game and give him his chance, and if he blows it, then bring Adrian back in, but give McCaffrey his chance, since he's our younger guy and he seems to have his head on his shoulders better than Adrian does right now. And I think if we do that, and our defense is able to slow Penn State down in the way that they were against, like you said, a pretty solid Northwestern offense, then I think we've got a shot at winning this game.
Okay. I like your optimism. I don't share it at this point, especially after what I've seen in the two games. It's all we got. We've only got 2 data points. I am now convinced that the progress that I had hoped we would have made, if I kind of go down the list, the offensive line improvement that I thought I witnessed at Ohio State seems to have been a bit of a mirage because Northwestern was in our backfield at the snap of the ball. It almost seemed like on a number of plays. I think part of that is that Northwestern understands our snap counts. They understand our offense and are able to, I don't know if they're stealing signals. I don't know what it is, but they know what's going to happen before the play starts. And that's because Scott's too damn predictable. And so there's some issues there with regard to how we disguise things and how we deal with, shifts on defense and things of that nature that need to be improved. And I don't know that you can correct all of that in 1 week. So my concern is that I don't think we have enough time to fix all that stuff in 1 week. Will we be better at that, all of that collectively by the end of the season? Yeah, I think towards the end of the season, we might be better, especially if we can avoid a bunch of injuries. But in 1 week, I don't see it. So I am of the opinion that I'm hopeful that what we will see is a more competitive Nebraska team that makes fewer mistakes, doesn't shoot itself in the foot as much this week, but we'll fall short because Penn State is just got too much more talent, too much more. I know that I'm not saying that right. It's just got more talent than us, and we can't overcome that unless they continue to be a stumbleitis kind of team like us and continue to make stupid mistakes. Then all's open. But if we both play reasonably clean football, I think Penn State beats us by 2 touchdowns, at least.
All right. So what's your score prediction then?
Man, I mean, after getting only 13 points this week, I'd like to think that Nebraska scores more than that. So I'm going to say Nebraska scores 24 and Penn State scores 42.
42. All right. So a little more than 2 touchdowns then. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and because I'm going in with the assumption that we will, like you say, we can't fix all of our problems in a week. I wish we could. But I think we will be improved. And if McCaffrey plays well, I think that will help us tremendously on offense. And I'm going to presume that Penn State is also struggling right now and 0-3 and not where they wanted to be with their season. And so I'm going to predict that they are going to make some mistakes that will give us a chance to stay in it. So I'll go ahead and predict that Penn State still wins, but I'm going to predict a lower scoring game and a closer game. So let's say that it is 28 Penn State to 24 Nebraska.
Okay. Well, see, I think I'm going to add this extra descriptive that I think Penn State is going to come out and they will come out and be very clean against us. They won't have many penalties. They won't have any turnovers because number one, our defense has never been very good at that, at actually being able to take advantage of turnover opportunities. We still don't know how to tackle. We're not rallying to the football the way we need to be. There's just so many elements of our defense that I like in our youth, but we're just not there yet. And when we get up against teams that have the talent differential that we're going to be going up against this week, I just think it does not bode well for us at all.
Well,
so I'm gonna call it another loss, and I think Penn State looks like the great team that they were supposed to be.
Okay. I think that I think you're being a little bit harsh on the tackling, because there were some really bad missed tackles in that Northwestern game that made me mad. But there were some really nice ones, or plays, where our guys read the play well, and got back there and stopped it immediately. We've generally in both, one consistent thing in the Northwestern game and the Ohio State game is that we've been pretty good at, shutting down the run for, good chunks of the game against our opponents. And that pressure we were able to get on their quarterback, all that stuff gives me hope that we'll see more of that from the defense.
Well, there you go. I like it.
All right.
I like it.
And then
I hope you're right. In fact, I hope somebody's going to predict that Nebraska wins, because that's what I want.
I saw.
Desperately.
I apparently it's Penn State's up by 4 points in like the odds makers right now, so they're predicting it's going to be close.
Well, that's not so much that they're predicting it's going to be close. They're just saying it's 4 points because they're trying to get 50% betting on both sides, and neither of these teams are going to get much action because no one knows what they're going to get out of either Nebraska or Penn State.
That's true. Too unpredictable. And then also this upcoming weekend, not quite as many good games as the past weekend. However, in the Big Ten, we've got a couple good ones. Indiana plays against Michigan State, and Michigan plays against Wisconsin. Now, what is Wisconsin's situation in regards to their players who are out due to COVID?
Okay, so that's good. That's a very good question. I don't know how the rules are actually going to be interpreted, but if I understand correctly, the starting quarterback is supposed to come off his 21 days so that he could play this Saturday. Okay, Mertz. I don't know how many of the other guys are in that situation in terms of their spot on the 21-day COVID timing. My perception is that most of the other guys won't be available, but they do have, the number of people with COVID has dropped at, it was at 22 or 23, and now it's down to I think 12. So they definitely have moved significantly in the right direction. They'll make the decision on on Tuesday. So we'll know here in the next couple of days what their decision is going to be, if it's to cancel. But I predict that they are going to move forward with the game to play it, because if they don't play this game, they are, according to the rules, ineligible for the Big Ten championship, because they will have lost 3 games to COVID.
Right.
So they'll be out of the running. So that Wisconsin's going to be desperate to try to make it happen. Now, can they field a decent team? It all depends on who these other sick players are, right? That can't go this week. So, but if they get a reasonably, competitive, most of their starters, I think they have a very good chance to beat Michigan, just because Michigan's really been struggling. And frankly, if Wisconsin's defense is able to play the way they played in the first game, they're going to be hard for Michigan to contend with.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that assessment. A lot obviously depends on the COVID situation. And then in the SEC, what would traditionally be a big blockbuster game is Alabama LSU. However, Alabama has, played well as you'd expect of them, whereas LSU has kind of fallen off a cliff after their national championship win. And
they hired Bo Pelini.
Yeah, that too. So I kind of expect that that's going to be pretty lopsided in Alabama's favor.
I would agree. Totally agree.
Yeah. So, yeah, but we'll look forward to that along with this upcoming Penn State game, and hope that, on the plus side, if we lose this game or we're past the tough first half of our season. So, the upcoming games we have a better chance against, although, if we keep making the fundamental mistakes, we won't beat anybody. So
right, exactly.
That's what really
But
needs to be fixed.
you are correct. After this weekend, then the second group of 4 games are games that we could view as athletically competitive games. Then it becomes an issue of coaching and execution. Whereas this game is a game where I still believe that we're going up against a team that at least has equal, if not superior, coaching, and definitely has better talent. So when you're in that situation, it's a big uphill climb to beat them, right? But Indiana did that, right? They beat Penn State. So there are some people that have already found a way to do it. And Penn State was helping them out a little bit too. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I think we'll need some help from Penn State for sure.
Absolutely.
So if you all out there enjoyed listening to this podcast, you could reach out to us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You can also find us if you search for College Football Throwdown on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a rating or a review there and let us know what you think of the podcast, what we can improve on. So thank you all out there for listening, and thank you, Dad, for co-hosting with me. And until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.